It was an old Muddy Waters blues song called Don't Start Me Talking. And I was just fascinated about where these people were. It had that old-fashioned blues ambient sound. And I imagined a certain bar somewhere in Memphis or somewhere, you know. And I filled all the rest in myself. And it wasn't a bit like I imagined, but it was a lot tougher than I imagined. But that's what it was. This strange guitar, and I asked somebody what this guitar was, and they told me it was slide guitar. And you put a bottleneck on this, and you play it without looking at the frets. And I found it was very, very expressive, you know. And that was it. I was hooked. I just didn't want to be a pop star, a rock star. That's why it started late. I was 22 at that point. And I'd missed that whole teenage thing of wanting to be in a band for fame and fortune and all that. I was obsessed with the musical side. And so I used to write songs for different bands. So I was in 3 bands in Middlesbrough, chopping around. And one night, a singer didn't turn up. And because I'd written the songs, or some of the songs, I had to have the job of going to the microphone because nobody else knew the words, you know, like the bass player, the guitarist, they didn't care about the words, you know. And that was it. I got offered a deal immediately, a publishing deal and a recording deal for myself without the band, you know, famous old story. And the band at the same time had just won the Melody Maker Song Contest. And so they had a record deal anyway. So the Losers had a record deal with EMI, and it was beautifully convenient, you know, that nobody at that point in time looked like they were leaving each other or anything. And they went to EMI and I went to Magnet Records. It was dreadful and it hasn't got any better. It's a strange situation I keep finding myself in. I've still got a piece of paper at home that says, "Fool if you think it's over." And in brackets it says, "Song for Al Green." And that's how I saw Fool If You Think It's Over. And they sent me down with Elton John's producer. And I didn't know that there was different ways you could make records. I thought, well, this guy's Elton John's producer. This has got to be the way it is. And the process was so slow. It was at the beginning of 16-track, 24-track tape recorders. Producers were into double tracking things, meticulous recordings. And I didn't know in the end what was going on. You know, I was fresh from Middlesbrough. And by the time Full came out, I'm still stood there going, I'm not happy with this. And they're going, "Oh, don't worry, Chris, don't worry." Next thing I knew, it was in the top 10 in America. And I was the goose that laid the golden egg. And so I was trapped, you know, in a kind of a poppy man sitting at piano image. And it just wasn't me. I had to fight really, really hard until they almost let me go. They were about to let me go. And there was a man from this very town telephoned me up and said, "If you come over here, I can put a good package together. I really like this record." And the record was Water Sign, and it was Dave Pennyfeather. And so at that point in time, I was going to open up an Italian restaurant and walk away from the music business. I knew I was still going to play. And my wife said, "Well, if this involves real gigs," because Dave was saying, what you do is you do a lot of small gigs around Ireland. When you've finished, you do it again. She said, "At least do this for a year before you make that final decision." And thankfully, it worked. We embarked upon a very happy period where I now had a very strict code. You know, we only do live gigs. We don't do any silly TV game shows. We don't do any silly things. We are strictly musicians in a band. And for that reason, it didn't happen in the UK, because in the UK, it's very, very difficult to have big hit records if you're not a pop star and you play the pop star game. And so we had this nice type of life where I was selling, you know, I was going gold everywhere in Europe. And I was coming back to England and no one knew me from Adam. And that was really nice. You know, I had this nice, relaxed, normal lifestyle in England, and yet I was selling tons of records. I stayed sane because I never went into it. You know, I did not open that little gate, that little, whatever it is, you know, set of cupboards. I didn't open that cupboard door. I was more than happy. All my financial troubles are gone. And I also have a pessimistic, you know, this, not pessimistic, but I tend to behave like an Italian football team in Europe, you know, where it's nil each and I'm happy. I get very defensive. And I didn't step into that bucket. I wasn't tempted, thank God. And I wanted to play the long game. So I thought, well, I won't cash in, I won't go berserk, and then be out of fashion 3 years later, like did happen to a lot of guys. And I planned just to make music as long as I lived. And I honestly to God, you know, and I had the chance then. A lot of people used to think it was bullshit. But I then had the opportunity to prove to people that, I was from Irish blood, because a lot of people used to think that was crap. And I have no reason to tell anyone that now other than the fact that it's true. And number two, I could just do music. You know, you don't have to be a rock star. It didn't turn me on. There was no pop star rubbish to it, you know. I wasn't being told how to dress, all of that stuff. I mean, I've always said I was born too old for the pop business anyway, you know. You know, I mean, I might look my age now, you know, but I always looked like this. I looked as old as I am now when I was 20. I always say thank God. Like when I came up with When the Grey Skies Turn to Blue on La Passione, I really did think, Jesus, this is my lucky day, because you sit at a piano and you get an idea straight out your heart and soul, and it matches some chords from a classic 50s era of ballad singing. And the title comes as you sing the title, as an emotion. And this is like as close as you can get the center of your whole soul and brain going into music. You know, you just sit at the piano and you go, when the grey skies turn to blue. And you go, fuck, that must be somebody else's, you know what I mean? So that's normally what I do. I normally phone Martin Ditcham, the drummer, who's always been with me, he's with Sade and Everything But a Girl, and he's a complete encyclopedia. He collects vinyl like you wouldn't believe. And I immediately phone him up, sing it, and he goes off. He says, give us a clue. I said, well, just see that it's not a Cole Porter song. I'll see this. And he comes back, no, can't find When the Grey Skies Turn to Blue anyway, you know. And then I always go to the window and I go, thank you, God, you know. Because that song is a cracker, you know. It's like Van Morrison's Have I Told You Lately That I Love You, or When the Autumn Leaves Come Down. There's songs we write as songwriters that you imagine somebody else singing. And then there's songs you write as a beat writer, you know, that's got lots of twists, like Espresso Logic is sort of a kind of Kerouac play thing, you know. And then there is the simple songs. I mean, Van Morrison does a lot of this. For me, he leads the way in all this. You know, he's like the big brother for people like myself. Yeah, he's the governor of that kind of thing. You know, 1 minute he's writing something really, really offbeat, and you've got to really, sometimes you have to go and reference to know what he's on about. And then he'll come up with a very, very straight 3-minute classic song that's could be sung by Frank Sinatra or somebody, you know. A story went around at one point way back, song off Deltics, which was a very sad song called Raincoat and a Rose. When I'd started to sing with my true low voice, instead of trying to sing high, Frank Sinatra was very interested in that song. And we were on real tenterhooks waiting to see, because you couldn't push, if he was going to actually record it on it. Apparently he tried it a couple of times live, and he got somebody to check out what the lyric was about. Well, unfortunately, the lyric was about, I mean, I have no regrets about what the lyric was about. It was an inspiration about a poor guy I knew who didn't know whether he was gay or not, and finished up outside the station, you know, doing, like, looking for a male prostitute to try and find out whether he was gay or not. You know, it's a very sad song. And when he found out that's what the song was about, he dropped it like a lead balloon. So, you know, maybe we should have told him it was about my wife. We'd arrived back from Milan, and it was one of them awful winter's nights when all you want to do is either get into a pub or get home. But you're in all this traffic, and it's lashing with rain, and the heater's too warm, and you've got to keep the heater on because the car's steaming up. And we're all in this car coming from the airport. And I telephoned home, and I said, keep the kids out the bath, because technically I'm about 8 minutes from home. And 3.5 hours later, we were still there. We hadn't moved 200 yards. And it was one of the first smells of the gridlock. And it started to get a little bit like a sinister movie, you know, because we were running out of cigarettes, and we found ourselves, we were starting to pass a cigarette round now. It was like a war film, you know, like you're hiding behind a haystack waiting for the Germans. And someone gets out to go for a wee, and this Range Rover police thing comes howling down with all the blue light, get back in your car, and there's a helicopter from a news team looking at this traffic jam. And it was like getting weird, you know. And I just leant against, after all this, I'm getting a bit tired, and I leant against the window, and I just saw this vision of my mother, you know, who died not long before that. And she was like saying, what the hell are you doing here, you know? This is not... And someone had said, you know, upwardly mobile freeway in some conversation. And I just got about Road to El Part 2 is it's exactly what the record company didn't order. And when they suggested Road to El Part 2, they were kind of thinking, yeah, we'll dish it up again. We'll do some disco remixes. And this kind of retro selling is big these days, you know, it's a fashion within the big corporate record companies. But I just went off left field with completely different ideas about, I was genuinely inspired at two things. A, how the man had changed in the traffic jam, and B, updating songs that were about, most of the songs in The Road to El Part 1 is a young guy singing about his children as they sleep, you know, fears for the future, fears about the traffic's getting bad, paranoia, you know. It was a very paranoid album. And this one is now those little kids in the cradles, they're now teenagers, and he's having to deal with teenage problems. I mean, E is a song about listening to three girls have a conversation about ecstasy, because I was stunned. I'm in a strange position. In our house, Josephine and Julia know all there is to know about the problems of being musicians. They've seen uncles who are heroin addicts, you know. It's not a big deal in the Rea house. It's not shock tactics to try and hit Papa with anything like that, you know. It's just been there all the time. It's a hazard of life, you know. So it's like modern problems of being a father, you know. But the other instance we wrote well part two was how happy men have got in cars. It's amazing. One of the other instances that inspired me was a geezer a friend of mine told me a story that he got home 20 minutes too early one night because the traffic wasn't so bad. And he was disappointed. He was actually disappointed because he'd listened to his radio show for the last 8 years, and he used to just nicely time the end of the radio show with getting home. And he was home and the radio show hadn't finished. And he sat outside his house in the drive, and all the family are looking at him, you know, from the house like this. And he sat listening to the end of the radio show. I thought, Jesus, you know, we really have evolved, you know. these men, I mean, another guy said to me, if it wasn't for traffic jams and mobile phones, he'd never speak to his mother. And you get these little things and you think, we are actually starting to enjoy this private space at the beginning and the end of each day. And that's what gave me a lot of inspiration for some of the songs. I like to think that this is some kind of Buddhism, you know, and it's leading me back to simplicity in the end, and there's going to be a nice album of 10 simple songs, you know, about simple things. So I'm waiting for myself to come back round the houses. It was like Richard Harris once said when a policeman found him drunk in London, laid in the street, and Bobby said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Well, somebody told me tonight the world spins round at